why does God allow evil and suffering? It's the one question that always comes up whenever there's a discussion about God. And almost always in such discussions, quoting from the Bible means nothing to someone who doesn't believe in God, who is suffering from disease, who has a child suffering from an incurable disease, or who has even lost a loved one. So in this presentation, scriptural references are put aside for the purposes of considering this question from a non-biblical perspective. The problem of evil and suffering is one of the most perplexing questions of philosophy and religion. It's a question that has been asked since the dawn of time. Is evil and suffering part of a greater plan? Or is it simply random chance, the result of a DNA lottery? And so, to consider this question, it's important we begin by understanding the true nature of evil. As a concept, evil is usually defined as profoundly immoral behaviour, and it's related to acts that cause unnecessary pain and suffering to others. Evil has always been part of human existence, but in recent times it has become particularly pervasive in the world. We humans like to label things as a way of understanding the world and to communicate effectively, and it's no different when it comes to evil. Evil has many labels. There's moral evil, which is the intentional wrongdoing by individuals. It includes acts such as murder and theft. And then there's natural evil, which occurs without intentional wrongdoing by humans. It includes events such as earthquakes, diseases, and floods. Metaphysical evil is a philosophical concept that addresses the intrinsic limitations and imperfections of creatures rather than specific acts of wrongdoing or natural disasters. And while not an evil per se, empirical evil refers to observable instances of suffering and wrongdoing. In other words, the various forms of evil we can see. There are also philosophical classifications of evil which include demonic evil. Even though this evil is often ascribed to a wicked supernatural entity, it often refers to malevolent individuals. There is instrumental evil, which refers to a self-conscious, freely chosen violation of a moral principle to satisfy personal interests or desires. We see this form of evil in environmental disasters resulting from industrial activities which cause pollution and waste, leading to various health issues in people and the natural world. Health issues which can affect our DNA. And while on this point, what about modern medicine? There's no doubt modern medicine has brought relief to many aspects of human suffering. But all medication has a wide range of side effects which can cause serious issues. Some side effects may appear in future generations. And vaccines are no exception. And what of man's own depravity? How do human activities like these impact our DNA in our own lifetime? What effect will these have on future generations? Could we be suffering the effects of past human actions? Throughout history, we have seen people commit atrocities under the guise of some ideology. The worst cases of this form of evil are evidenced through genocide, where mass killings have been justified by perpetrators on the grounds of ethnicity, religion, or political identity. There is human incompetence, such as accidents resulting from carelessness, where harm is caused without malicious intent. And then there's the concept of pure evil, which refers to someone who embodies complete malevolence, engaging in evil actions naturally and without remorse. These classifications help us to understand the complex nature of evil and its manifestations in human behaviour and the natural world. Each classification raises important ethical and philosophical questions about morality, responsibility, and the human condition. Ultimately, these classifications fall into two main forms of evil which are manifest in human behaviour and the natural world. There are obvious and profoundly immoral evils attributable to human behaviour which we can all immediately recognise. There are other evils which are just as immoral. And there are other, less obvious forms of evil, some of which are no longer considered to be evil due to shifts in societal norms and changes to laws. Depending on where you are in the world, there may be other forms of evil. So, what do we consider to be evil? Premeditated murder is evil, without any doubt. But what about other instances where death is the outcome of our survival responses, or the increasing acceptance of the intentional ending of life to alleviate pain and suffering? Is this still murder? Theft arising from jealousy or criminal enterprise is another evil. But what if theft arises from poverty, where someone has little or no food for themselves or their family? What if they steal a loaf of bread? Is this still theft? And what about war? Many wars have resulted from greed or some ideology. What if it arises out of some humanitarian need, or to save oppressed people under a tyrannical regime? In whatever form evil occurs, it results in human suffering. There's not one person in the world who does not suffer. Human suffering can be categorized as physical suffering or emotional and psychological suffering. There is suffering caused by human actions from the various forms of evil, and there is suffering which comes from natural events. Suffering also comes from our human condition, which is the consequence of both human evil and natural events. Suffering can come from disasters caused by accidental human actions, such as transport accidents, industrial accidents, or accidents which affect our health, such as famine and pandemics. And then there are disasters caused by deliberate human action, many of which arise from human destructiveness and evil. Suffering from natural disasters arises from geological activity, weather and climate events, and environmental factors. Every day, our news platforms are filled with stories of suffering from all over the world. And behind all the suffering is some form of evil. The existence of evil and suffering inevitably leads many to question the existence of God, and to ask, why does God allow evil and suffering in the world? Man lives in a universe of cause and effect. Fire burns, water drowns, disease germs destroy. These facts have moral implications. The consequences of what men do are inescapable, and therefore their responsibility for what they do is equally inescapable. Without this burden of natural law, man could do as he liked with impunity, and there would be no responsibility. Philosophers and theologians have attempted to explain this relationship from different perspectives. But such discussions mean nothing to someone who has a child suffering from some incurable disease, or worse still, has lost a child or loved one because of disease or some form of evil. And so, in many such instances, the blame is inevitably thrown at God. But what is evident are those observable causes of suffering arising from human actions and natural events. So, before blaming God, as difficult as it is, should we not first understand the true cause of such suffering? We can easily understand the causes of natural suffering, but to understand what is behind moral evil is not always obvious. We must begin by understanding what is behind human actions. Our emotions are an important consideration in understanding evil and suffering. Our emotions are powerful influences in our lives. Anger, hatred, pride and jealousy are some of the emotions commonly associated with personal forms of evil. While emotions can influence behaviours, Motives are the reasons behind those actions. Just like the definitions of evil vary, so too does the analysis of motives. Our emotions are the driving force behind our motives and together direct our actions. They can influence the intensity and direction of behaviour, making them a powerful component of motivation. For example, at its core, greed is the emotion often driving a desire for control and power. The interplay between emotions and motivation is dynamic and context dependent, meaning that the same emotion can drive different behaviours in different situations. Fear, for example, is an essential survival mechanism, triggering the body's fight or flight response in life-threatening situations. Another aspect to consider of our human existence is free will, and related to free will is the concept of choice. While they are often used interchangeably in casual conversation, they are not the same, having distinct meanings in philosophical and psychological contexts. Free choice refers to deciding between two or more options, and those decisions can be influenced by external factors such as societal norms or personal biases. Free will is the ability to make decisions that are independent of external forces and is often associated with moral responsibility, as it implies that individuals can be held accountable for their actions. Free choice is a subset of free will, highlighting that while we have the freedom to choose, it does not necessarily mean that our will is entirely free from external influences. We can choose between going out to eat or staying home. We can choose between right and wrong, to obey or not to obey, and between doing good or doing evil. While we can make decisions based on our own values and beliefs, we can still be influenced by external factors such as societal norms. So without free will, we would not be able to choose. And if we could not make choices, would evil and suffering exist? And what about our emotions and motives which drive our choices? Being without free will and choice places the existence of emotions and motives into question. What would we look like without emotions, motives, and without choice? The fact is, we do have free will, and we do have emotions and motives which influence the choices we make and which determine the outcomes of our decisions. When we consider these aspects of our human existence, we can start to appreciate the source of evil and the suffering it causes. Yet, because we have free will, and because we are motivated by different things, we don't always agree on the same thing. The generation gap highlights how people of different age groups don't always see eye to eye, and the same thing can be said across different demographic groups. People have different opinions and views about many things in life, which are shaped by many different factors, such as our upbringing, our social standing, or where we live, just to name a few. For example, there are some forms of evil which are now considered acceptable. Adultery was once considered a serious crime and a moral sin, but today it has become acceptable in many societies. The acceptance of fornication in modern society has evolved significantly over time, and today is often seen as a natural part of human relationships. This shift in attitudes has been influenced by modern-day factors such as sexual liberation movements and the acceptance of non-traditional relationships. With such changes, we must wonder what other human factors will influence our view on evil over the course of time. It seems modern society tolerates various forms of evil, including systemic injustice, corruption, exploitation, and moral decay, which is being often normalised or overlooked in daily life. As disturbing as the increasing evil is now, worse is on the horizon. The movement to decriminalise sex work is gaining ground as activists and politicians advocate for such laws. polyamory, so-called ethical non-monogamy, or the practice of openly having multiple romantic partners, is on the rise. The line between abortion and infanticide seems to be smudging. Even worse will likely follow, including practices such as pedophilia, incest and bestiality, along with more extreme and open forms of racism, hatred, greed, corruption, theft, violence and mass shootings. If we can't all agree on all forms of evil, can we agree on who will judge? The justice system consists of people who are susceptible to evil like everyone else in the world, and at times we see this manifested through corruption and flaws in the justice system. And if we can't all agree on all forms of evil, how can we all agree on the appropriate punishment for evil? Like some forms of evil, punishment has also evolved significantly over time, highlighting our changing attitudes towards punishment. And when will we want the punishment administered, and by who? Do we hold a lynch mob mentality demanding immediate justice, or will we want to hear all the facts? How will we ensure the scales of justice are balanced for everyone? There will always be people who are not satisfied with judicial decisions or the punishment administered. Who will determine whether justice has been administered in truth and fairness? Will justice change over time, just like the acceptance of some forms of evil? In ancient Greece and Rome, justice was closely linked to fairness, revenge and retribution, focusing on punishing offenders and restoring community balance. During the Middle Ages, justice was tied to feudalism and the authority of the monarchy, emphasising obedience and loyalty to rulers. In the Enlightenment period of the 17th and 18th centuries, there was a shift towards a rational, universal perspective of justice for individual rights and the rule of law. Today, modern justice in many societies emphasises human and social rights, alongside restorative justice, which prioritises rehabilitation and reparations rather than mere punishment. And so, given our differing views and approaches to understanding and judging all forms of evil, how can we impose our different views of justice on God? If we can't all agree on all forms of evil or even the appropriate punishment, how can we then criticise God for not punishing evil on demand? The same question arises when it comes to natural evil. Do we impose our individual views on God of how nature should work and expect Him to alter the natural world? Our mountains and valleys, our rivers and forests are the result of a natural order and cycle. How will altering that natural order change the world we now know? Yet that's what we do. We expect God to administer punishment on evil acts and turn around or prevent natural events to appease our hurt, our anger, our suffering. And if God did act, would that appease everyone in the world? Would that be fair justice to everyone in the world, given the different values, beliefs and social circumstances? Given our different views, would we be guilty of committing some evil in the eyes of other people who will demand God punishes us? And so, when evil goes unpunished in the world, when people die or are hurt or suffer, when things don't happen the way we want, because our expectations aren't met, we end up questioning the existence of God and we blame God. And we expect God to not allow suffering, to not allow evil, and to administer immediate justice on the wicked. But if we blame God, are we in fact acknowledging He exists? And if that's the case, would it not make sense to understand God before blaming Him? It's easy to blame others when things go wrong in our lives. We're often motivated to blame or judge others even when we don't know the actual intention behind their action. Motive plays a crucial role in the process of blame. The concepts of blame and motive are interconnected in moral and social contexts, If we understand the motives of another person, we might understand the reason why they do what they do. So before blaming God for evil and suffering, we first need to understand his motives. If we believe in God, if we believe God authored the Bible, we can understand his motives through his plan and purpose, which he has revealed in the Bible. Only then can we consider evil and suffering from his perspective, and only then can we decide whether to blame God. If we believe in God, then we believe he created people and has given us free will to be able to make choices. And with free will comes responsibility. Responsibility for our choices, decisions, and our actions, to do good or to do evil, and therefore our ability to affect suffering and its cause. And with that responsibility comes the consequences for the choices we make. And if we believe in God and believe he authored the Bible, then we accept he knows all the evil done in the world, and we accept he has a plan and purpose to solve the problem of evil. And we must accept God will deal with evil and suffering according to his time frame, not ours. And we must also accept God will deal with evil and suffering according to his ways and not ours. If after we get to know God through the Bible, if we still don't agree with his motives, then we can continue to blame God. God has given us free will to make such a choice. If we had a perfect life, there would be no evil or suffering. And if there would be no evil or suffering, would we have free will and be able to choose what we wanted? If we didn't have free will, we would be nothing more than robots. So if we accept and believe in God, then the question of whether God is the cause of all the evil and suffering in the world becomes clear. It comes down to what we believe. Because we have free will, we can choose to believe God exists, or we can choose to believe he doesn't exist. To believe or not to believe shapes the path we take in life. If we choose to believe God does not exist, then nothing will satisfy our understanding of evil and suffering. We may as well simply live our lives and hope for the best each day. If you think God got it wrong, what would you do to correct the situation? How would you address evil in the world, given we have choice, which inevitably means we will have different views of evil? And how would you punish those who commit evil acts? Would you administer justice in a way that satisfies everyone? But if we believe God does exist, then we must understand his plan and purpose to make sense of evil and suffering. And if we believe God does exist, then as the creator of all things, how can we, as his creation, question his decisions? Only when we understand God's plan and purpose with the earth and its people can we understand the true origin of evil and accept suffering. And because God has given us free will to choose between good and evil, we must understand our nature and take personal responsibility for the choices we make. So the starting point to this question is belief, and it's also the end.